sisters and brothers. And so there was very interesting research done, I think about 25 years ago, so it's not new, but they were talking about the different hemispheres of the brain. And it seems that women's brains are more easily open to studying aspects of spirituality and intuition and creativity. And so the left side of the brain is more tuned to logic and logistics and things of that nature. But the right hemisphere is connected very much with spirituality, creativity, and things of that nature. And so it seems that somehow women have that more highly developed. And if I'm looking at the state of the world today, then I'm seeing that that's very much the side that has been missing for a few thousand years in terms of the patriarchal society. And so definitely it's time to bring that element back in so that we can have a properly balanced world. If I hadn't discovered spirituality and studied it properly when I was 18, I think quite likely I would have been quite an aggressive feminist. Because I became aware of different attitudes to girls and boys when I was about 11. And, and from that time on, it was always a question in my mind, but why? But why? And growing up in an Indian household in London exacerbated this issue, because on the one side I was seeing all the discussions happening. This was in the 60s, so feminism was just on the rise. And at home, although my mother was deeply spiritual and following a spiritual path, she still had traditional cultural ideas about the role of women and men. And so she would love my brother and me equally, but yet there were different expectations she had for him than she had for me, many different aspects. And so these issues came up, but they came to a head when I think I was 17. And at that time, I was applying for medical school. And a medical school dean, the head of the medical school, he told me that they had only 20% of the places for women. This was in 1967, so it's not like ancient times, it's the 20th century. But 20% of the places were there for women only. And I asked why, and he said that, well, our experience tells us that we invest a lot of time, money, and energy into training women, and then they get married and go off and have children, and the training goes to waste. So I could feel my anger rising. And I had to contain myself and just nod. I couldn't say anything to him. But in a way, that was for me a very clear indication that it wasn't just part of the world that treated women differently, but it was a universal issue. Because up until then, it wasn't so blatant, not in London. Schools were excellent, everything seemed to be open, but this particular incident made me aware. And then, as I say, I was very lucky that the following year, I started on a spiritual path, and I realized that real empowerment comes through your own inner dignity, and that comes through understanding who you are. And then, whether it's a masculine body or a female body, whatever it is, whatever role you're playing, you're able to play that to the best of your capacity if there's an understanding of your own inner identity. And so empowerment, whether it's women's empowerment or men's empowerment, really comes from connecting with your real being, the being that you are within. And after that, I've never ever felt that there's a disadvantage in being a woman. Actually, it's interesting because my first visit to Berlin was in 1975. And that's a long time ago. And some of you will know it from history books. But it was a very different Berlin. And it was a conference for women, because it was the first event that had taken place for women by the UN. And at that time, it was described as the International Year for Women. Then it became the Decade for Women. Then it became another decade, and so that carried on. But I arrived in Berlin, and at that time, I didn't know which part of the city I was on. And I thought it was a UN conference. The invitation had come to me from India to represent the Brahmakumaris, because I was closest living in London. And I arrived with a suitcase full of books on meditation. But it was fine, because I was part of a whole big group of women, and they put us on the coach, and we came to Checkpoint Charlie, and they knew we were here for a conference, and so they just let everybody through. And so ignorance is bliss. If I'd actually known I was coming to East Berlin and the conditions, maybe I would have been a bit scared to bring even one little book. But it was fascinating to come here at that time. Very different situation. But that conference, again, was on the one side a showcase for East Germany and Russia, because they were telling us how free women were, how wonderful the opportunities the communist world gave women, and how tragic the situation was in the West. So it was a real showcase. But it was an amazing opportunity for me to learn and meet women from across the world. Really beautiful experience, very powerful. At that time, in the 70s and even through in the 80s, women weren't really looking at spirituality, because people didn't understand the difference between religion and spirituality at that point. And so where religion traditionally, every single religion, and some more than others, have given women a very secondary role, whether it's Hinduism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, everywhere. And so women who were within the feminist activist movement really rejected religion, because that's what had kept them down in bondage. And so spirituality was not really part of their agenda. But that's changed. In the 21st century now, anybody who's really concerned with women's empowerment understands absolutely that empowerment is very much to do with spirituality. And so the world has changed. Just as within the whole area of the environment, again, I've been involved in that since the 80s, religion was something that was not really looked at, and people didn't again bother to see what's the difference between spirituality and religion. And that's gradually changed to the point where 2 years ago in Paris, most of the different panels that were being organized at COP wanted to have some representation from a faith-based organization. And they were saying that it's the faith traditions that reach the grassroots. And so we want their involvement, because people's attitudes are going to change through that. So the 21st century for me has been very exciting. It's been a time for recognizing the spiritual